has a lot of money. The question is, how are you going to get them to act? My fundamental belief is that most of these free market corporations look towards profitability and are never really good or bad in and of themselves. But like many things, they do good and bad things. But basically, the business of these corporations, I would say, is producing chocolate. And they're probably very good at that. But they're not going to be very good at dealing with labor issues. And that goes across the board with a lot of major corporations. So when you go to them, you need to go to them with ways in which they can help solve the problem. So the biggest thing to me was thinking about how would you approach these corporations? What would you tell them they should be doing, rather than simply saying, don't buy cocoa beans from the Ivory Coast, which might be a simplistic answer, but I don't think we'd go that far in solving the problem. So that was my initial reaction.
I'd like to rephrase the question. Instead of who's to blame, I'm going to say what's to blame. I think the blame rests with poverty. You have to be in extremely impoverished conditions to be willing to ship your children off to work under these circumstances. Child labor is awful. It's unpleasant. And yet people are so poor that they will make the choice to do that. The little girl who was apprehended, when asked what will your parents say when they see you again now that you're going back home, they'll be mad because I'm not bringing money home. Not glad to see me. They'll be mad because I don't bring money home. Poverty is the problem. The second problem is people are not enforcing the law. So plenty of laws against this. The children had to be snuck into the area, into Ivory Coast. They had to go illegally through customs. Ivory Coast seems to be sort of supervising this with a blind eye because it doesn't want to see things. Why are people doing that? Why are they not enforcing the law? I think, again, the answer is they want the money. If poverty is the cause, then it seems to me the last thing you would want to do would be to stop buying beans from the Ivory Coast, cocoa beans. If you stop the demand for chocolate and thus stop the demand for beans, you inflict worse poverty. We just learned that it was a quarter of the domestic product of the Ivory Coast, and without it, the company, the corporate, see, I'm a company guy, the country would collapse. If a country collapses, poverty is worse. It exacerbates the very cause of this. The answer, I think, is something similar to what we've seen in our own experience. We had child labor in the United States. We had it before World War I. You had it in Europe before World War I. The economy got better. We adopted laws and enforced them. You don't see it very much anymore.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
We still do have some issues with slaving our children here in the United States.
Didn't say we'd reach perfection, but I'm saying you will not commonly walk into a factory and see it populated with young children.
Let me just go to your honor here. So poverty is the cause. And what the corporations said is, you know, we don't have any direct control over the cocoa plantations. So is it okay for corporations to say, I see no evil, I hear no evil, I say no evil? Is their problem, they are a poor nation, we are just helping them by buying the cocoa beans, and what happens behind the scenes in the plantations is not our problem.
No, I don't buy that argument at all. I think that when you're dealing with corporations, it's true, they operate from a profit motive, but they also have shareholders. Now, one of the major suppliers here is Cargill. Cargill happens to be the largest privately held company in the United States. It is many times bigger than many of the New York Stock Exchange companies, but it is still controlled by the Cargill family. And very surprisingly, they're probably, I think, in the 5th generation now, and they're still functioning as a private company. So there we don't have the same power, perhaps, to get the shareholders to be heard. So I have to put Cargill aside. But Archer Daniel Midlands does not have a very good record publicly. It was involved in a horrendous price-fixing scandal about 15 years ago. It's not a company that one would think is so pristine. And Nestle is a Swiss company. I don't know to what extent they have shareholders in the United States, but I know that ADM does. And one of the important things today in corporate governance is the strength of institutional investors. They are the ones who basically control the companies. And I think the first step would be to find out who the institutional investors are in these various companies and show them this movie. And let them see the extent to which they are investing in a company that is engaging in some horrible, or at least I should say not engaging, but advancing the interests of people like these traffickers and governmental officials over in the Ivory Coast who, frankly, say one thing, that they have a law, say that there is no cocoa being grown at this time, and you just have to question the integrity of the process in the Cote D'Ivoire. So I think the place to start is with the shareholders.
So there is a big role for the shareholders in here. Giselle, your impression, we know that these children need perhaps to work for their families. The way that they are treated, let me just get your reaction to the documentary.
I just think, you know, thank you. I'm just saying, watching that, it just breaks my heart, because I understand that in some situations, parents or families are struggling, and a lot of what I saw in the film, you see a lot of that within our agricultural industry. Unfortunately, a lot of the farm workers, a lot of the people that work on the cocoa fields are not being paid fair wages. And unfortunately, a lot of them are having to force their children to work in the cocoa fields just to be able to make ends meet, just to be able to put food on the table. And honestly, I feel that the corporations need to step it up and treat the workers fairly, pay them what they need, what they deserve, and follow the laws. I mean, it's sad to see that everyone is saying, oh, this doesn't happen, we don't know what you're talking about, but it's happening right under their noses. And again, it's so sad to know that these children are being forced into this, and the working conditions, the fact that they have to handle pesticides, of course they have to work out in the sun, they don't get clean food, clean water, their universal or their human rights are being violated by not being able to go to school, by not getting the proper medical attention. And I really think that we as consumers need to say, hey, you know, enough is enough. We need to start seeing better treatment of the workers, and we need to make sure that no children are involved in this type of work.
So, role for the stockholders and a role for the consumers. So here we have a consumer who said, you know, I'm becoming aware of these issues taking place. What should consumers do? What did you do when you got to know that child slavery was being used to produce coffee?
The first thing that I did was to educate myself, because I had no idea that this was going on. And when when I started to educate myself, I started to speak to people, and I knew a lot of missionaries who went back and forth to Africa. So I spoke to a lot of missionaries and asked them their take on what was going on up there, and their take is a lot different even from that video. These are people who work with the families and work in the clinics. I have a very good friend who does surgery in Burkina Faso, and she said that the clinical aspect of what goes on in there is just horrendous. And then the fact that there's no money exchanging hands with these children. Not that that makes it acceptable. And that was one thing that really bothered me in the movie, was when they said, you know, some of the kids are paid and some of them aren't. What difference does it make? They're children. I have 4 grandchildren, they're boys, and if one of them were sitting on a bench crying like that, it would break my heart that they were being forced to do something against their will. And as a consumer, what I've done now is I make sure that I check the labels. I check the labels to see if what I'm buying is fair trade. I don't buy as much chocolate as I used to because I want to buy fair trade chocolate. And so it's put me in a different position financially because it's much more expensive. But does it really matter? Doesn't it matter more that we're actually helping somebody, that we're actually making a difference to somebody, even if we never see that person? And so that's when I first found out about this, the passion that came from it was because I just couldn't stand the thought that children were being used and abused to bring something to me that they'd never even tasted.
I think that's an excellent point about the consumer.